So it's the summer of 1862, and the American Civil War is really at a tipping point. The Confederacy, they're exhausted, they're running out of everything, and they are losing a war of attrition. You know, that slow, grinding kind of war where the side with more people and more stuff is just bound to win. And that's when its greatest general, Robert E. Lee, decides to do the unthinkable. He's going on the attack and taking the war straight to the north. This was Lee's great gamble, and believe me, it was going to change the course of the war forever.
Just look at the two sides. On one hand, you've got the Union. They have a seemingly endless supply of men, of material, but they're led by George McClellan, a general who was crippled by what people at the time called delusional timidity. And then you have the Confederacy. Their manpower is drying up fast, their soldiers are starving, a lot of them don't even have shoes. But they had Robert E. Lee. And Lee was a commander who knew he had to win the war quickly or else face certain defeat. And that, right there, sets up the huge question behind this entire campaign. How did one general's sheer audacity, his willingness to bet it all, nearly win a war that by all logic should have been unwinnable? It's a story of incredible risk, battlefield genius, and a desperate gamble to land a knockout blow against a much, much stronger opponent.
Okay, so to really get a grip on this incredible gamble, you gotta understand the guys in charge. This wasn't just a clash of armies, you see. It was a clash of personalities, where massive egos and some pretty fatal flaws would end up deciding the fate of thousands of men. Now, what's really fascinating here is the stark contrast. You have McClellan, who constantly believed he was outnumbered. He was convinced Lee had 200,000 men, when in reality, Lee had less than half that. Then there's John Pope. He's brought in to be this aggressive new general, but he's so arrogant he actually manages to insult his own demoralized troops in his introductory speech. And standing against them both, Robert E. Lee, who had zero delusions about how desperate his situation was. He knew his only path to victory was pure, unadulterated audacity. So, what's Lee's first move? Well, he's got to deal with Pope's new army, which is pushing down into Virginia. He absolutely could not let Pope and McClellan link up their two massive forces. So he decides to do something incredibly risky, attack Pope while he's still isolated and exposed. And this is where the gamble becomes legendary. Lee does something that goes against pretty much every rule in the military handbook. He divides his smaller army right in the face of a larger one. He sends his most trusted lieutenant, the famous Stonewall Jackson, on this grueling 50-mile secret march to get behind Pope's army, destroy his entire supply base, and then just disappear and wait to spring a trap. It was absolutely insane. And this chart, wow, it just lays out the sheer risk involved. Pope had 77,000 men. Lee had only 55,000, and remember, he had just split them into two separate forces. If Pope had any clue what was happening, he could have just turned and crushed Lee's army piece by piece. Game over. But he didn't. General Pope was completely baffled. After Jackson's men torched his supply depot, Pope totally lost track of them and somehow convinced himself they were retreating. He just ignored all the evidence that the other half of Lee's army was coming up fast. Instead, he ordered his men to chase down this phantom retreat, walking them right into Lee's trap.
So the result? The Second Battle of Bull Run. And it was a stunning Confederate victory. Lee's army inflicted double the casualties it took and sent the Union army scrambling back to Washington, completely humiliated. But here's the crucial part. Pope's army escaped. Yeah, it was crippled, but it wasn't destroyed. And Lee needed a true war-ending victory. This wasn't it.
And you know, that very victory created a brand new, massive problem. Lee's army was now deep in northern Virginia, a landscape that had just been torn apart by war. There was no food for his soldiers. If they stayed put, they'd starve. If they retreated, it would look like a defeat. So Lee, he chose a third, even a riskier option. He decided to invade the north. Now, this move had a bunch of ambitious goals. The most immediate one was just simple survival. Let his army eat from the rich farms of Pennsylvania. But he was also hoping to cut a vital railroad line that supplied Washington, shatter Northern morale right before the big fall elections, and most importantly, force the Union into one last decisive battle, fought on his terms. And this invasion, this desperate push north, brings Lee's army to a little creek in Maryland called Antietam. And it was right here that his audacious campaign would reach its brutal, bloody climax. And then, something happened that you just couldn't make up if you tried. A Union corporal, just walking through a field, finds a piece of paper.
It's a copy of Lee's Special Order 191, his entire invasion plan, detailing the routes, the objectives, everything for his divided army, and it was just casually wrapped around 3 cigars and dropped. It has to be one of the greatest intelligence windfalls in all of military history.
So these plans are rushed to General McClellan. He now knows exactly where all of Lee's scattered forces are. He actually exclaimed, "Now I know what to do." And then he proceeded to do absolutely nothing for 18 critical hours. That unbelievable delay gave Lee just enough time to find out his plans had been compromised and start frantically pulling his army together for a desperate stand. The battle that followed was just a chaotic, brutal slugfest. It kicked off at dawn in a cornfield, then it shifted to a sunken road that would forever be known as Bloody Lane, and then it all culminated in this terrible struggle for a single stone bridge. Just when it looked like the Union forces were finally about to break Lee's right flank late in the afternoon, Confederate General A.P. Hill's division showed up at the last possible second after a punishing forced march, smashing into the Union advance and saving Lee's army from total destruction.
When the guns finally fell silent, the fields were just littered with over 22,700 casualties. To this day, it remains the single bloodiest day in all of American history. It was on this horrific field that a woman named Claire Barton, who would later go on to found the American Red Cross, worked tirelessly, tending to the wounded and dying.
So what did all this horror and carnage actually achieve? Well, the battle itself was technically a draw, but its strategic consequences, they would change the entire course of the war.
Let's just break this down for a second. Look at the numbers. Tactically, on the battlefield that day, it was a stalemate, a bloody draw. But strategically, it was a massive defeat for Lee. He lost nearly a third of his army and, crucially, was forced to call off his invasion of the North. For the Union, just stopping Lee's invasion was enough for them to claim a huge strategic victory. But McClellan, being McClellan, just refused to pursue Lee's shattered army as it retreated back into Virginia. He lost his golden opportunity to maybe, just maybe, end the war right then and there. And for President Abraham Lincoln, that was the last straw. He had given McClellan perfect intelligence, overwhelming numbers, and the best he could manage was a bloody tie. He was fired, this time, for good.
And yet, this quote from Lincoln, it just shows you the impossible position he was in. He knew McClellan was a terrible fighter, but he also knew that there was no one better at organizing and training the army. So he was stuck, right? Stuck using a brilliant organizer who was, at his core, a terrible battlefield commander.
So that really leaves us with a final provocative thought. Lee's great gamble? It failed. But the Union's victory at Antietam felt like anything but a victory. And yet, that bloody stalemate was just enough of a win for Abraham Lincoln to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, which fundamentally changed the moral and political stakes of the entire war. So, was it worth it? In a war of survival, is a bloody stalemate a victory? That's a question historians are still debating today.